Welcome to part 3 of Airbrushing Basics. Today we're going to talk about the main ingredient. We're going to talk about paint. And before we get into thinning your paint, putting it in the airbrush and so forth, we're going to talk a little bit about paint composition. It's very important. I'm no chemist, so I don't know specifics, but it's important to know about the solvents and things you use in order to get the best finish with your airbrush. So let's talk about paint composition. Paint is composed of 3 elements: the pigment, the binder, and the solvent. The pigment in your paint is what gives its color, its opacity, its texture. Pigment in hobby paints are ground extremely fine so that they don't obscure detail and they go on really smoothly. Clear paints like glosses and flats, they have no pigment. The most important element is the binder. The binder is what binds the pigment together in paint. It determines the adhesion and the curing of the paint, or the drying time of the paint. It strongly influences flexibility, durability, finish, and so forth. Hobby paints use 2 different types of binder: an acrylic binder or an oil-based binder. The third element in paint is the solvent, and that's what we're going to be focusing on the most. Solvent is what's used to dissolve the binder in the paint, or to thin the paint out. It can be either an acrylic solvent, which would be water, alcohol, and so forth, or an oil-based solvent, turpentine, mineral spirits, and so forth, lacquer thinners. So we're going to look at basically how to thin your paint down using a solvent and the different types of paints. In the hobby world, when it comes to airbrushing, there's basically 4 types of paint available. There are water-based acrylics, alcohol-based acrylics, enamel paint, and lacquer-based paints. And we're going to take a look at those and discuss them. As their name implies, water-based acrylics are thinned with water. Their fast drying time is a positive, but it can also lead to the paint drying too quickly and clogging the tip of the airbrush. Manufacturers produce their own thinners that improve the paint's performance and characteristics, making it easier to spray and slowing the drying time. Water-based acrylics are non-toxic and easy to clean up, which is great for beginners. Alcohol-based acrylics are great for airbrushing when they are thinned with the appropriate solvent. Don't use water. They can be thinned with alcohol or lacquer thinner. Lacquer thinner greatly improves their performance and provides a hard, durable finish. Make sure to use proper ventilation and safety precautions when airbrushing them. Lacquer-based paints are cellulose-based acrylics that provide a hard, durable finish. They are fast drying, but do not dry in the tip of the airbrush. The best-looking metallic colors are lacquer-based. Lacquer paints must be sprayed in thin coats to avoid eating through plastic, paint, and decals. Proper ventilation and safety equipment are a must when spraying lacquers. Enamel paints were the first paints designed specifically for use on plastic models. Enamels use petroleum-based solvents, which classifies them as oil-based. Enamels have a long curing time. They dry on the surface first, but it can take up to a week for them to fully cure. Enamel paints have a strong smell and vapors, and proper ventilation and safety precautions are a must. We're going to wrap up our discussion of paints for airbrushing with a few quick words about solvents or thinners and additives for your paint. As you can see behind me, I have a lot of different thinners out here, and it's very important to use the proper thinner or solvent in the proper ratio when you airbrush if you want to get good results. So if I'm going to go and grab my Tamiya paint and spray it out on my airbrush, I always grab my Tamiya thinner. I know it's going to work. If I mix it properly, it's going to spray, give me a beautiful finish. So, rule of thumb, use the thinner or solvent from the manufacturer with their paint, and you'll always get a good result. Something else to keep in mind is, with water-based paints such as Vallejo, like their Model Air, even though this is designed to shoot straight out of an airbrush, there's always going to be a time when you want to thin this down a little bit depending on what you're spraying, how fine the line is. So use the Vallejo thinner. It has additives in it that help it, that slow down the drying time. They sell the additives separately, like flow improver, paint retarder. Use them. It keeps the paint from drying too fast and clogging up the tip on your air gun. So, rule of thumb, Make sure to use the manufacturer's solvent or thinner with their paint in the proper ratio. And we'll see you next time.